Welcome everyone to the Wet Center webinar series. Every Friday, we bring key industry personnel and also entrepreneurs to interview and provide insights that you can apply to your day-to-day business. As a clean tech or energy startup, finding the right governmental partnerships in your industry is crucial for success. One key partnership to consider for all clean tech startups is the California Energy Commission, or the CEC. The California Energy Commission is the leading organization on bringing the state of California into a 100% clean energy future. This will be no easy feat, and the CEC recognizes the importance of the introduction of new clean technologies to reach this goal. The wide variety of different programs and supporting resources for clean tech startups, plugging in with the CEC is essential for any water, energy, or ag tech business. Joining us is Eric Stokes, Chief of the Energy Deployment and Market Facilitation Office for the CEC, to discuss their many resources, funding opportunities, and how startups of different stages and technologies can plug in with their resources to develop further in the California clean tech economy. In addition, Helly Peterson, Director of the Wet Center, will also be moderating as well. Eric, would you mind starting us off with a quick background on yourself and then an overview of the CEC?
Yeah, of course. So my name's Eric Stokes, as Ben mentioned. I'm the branch chief for the Energy Deployment and Market Facilitation Office at the California Energy Commission. We're housed under the Energy Research and Development Division. So just a little bit of background on the Energy Research and Development Division. We're a division of approximately 90 to 100 staff, comprised of 4 offices, and within each office we have multiple business units. And we're responsible for administering a lot of the grant programs that are really helping to advance new energy technologies and science. A little bit about myself and my background. I got my start off in actually storage, but a different type of storage, was data storage. I spent a few years working on kind of next generation hard drives and other types of data storage technologies. After doing that for a couple of years, I realized I was more interested in the application of new technology than actually developing new technologies myself. And so went back to grad school and was originally pursuing kind of a dual master's degree in electrical engineering and MBA, and realized that was too tough for my abilities. And so kind of focused on the MBA. About halfway through my MBA program, I decided what I really was interested in is kind of public policy and really kind of the intersection of technology with kind of the ability to kind of really bring about societal benefits. And so that essentially led me to the California Energy Commission, where I got my start working in the Energy Research and Development Division, first as an analyst, and kind of worked my way up through the various levels. Spent a few years supervising our Renewable Energy Research Unit. And then about 6 years ago, the Research and Development Division, it used to be just 3 offices. We found a gap in the R&D space where we really needed a much better focus around the market aspects and trying to bring new technologies to market. And this really had a lot of its roots in starting in 2008. At the time, the federal administration at the time, was very supportive of clean energy technologies. There was a lot of interest and excitement among investors, and there was a lot of money available. Venture capitalists that had made a lot of money in Twitter and Facebook, we're really excited about the opportunities of clean tech, and we're investing lots of money. And then about 4 or 5 years, something happened, and private sector investors just completely pulled out of clean tech. And there was kind of an autopsy of why this happened, and there was a lot of factors that led to kind of this decline in private sector investment in clean tech. A couple of those was a lot of these investors didn't really understand what it takes to develop and scale new energy technologies, or technologies that are based more on hard science as opposed to software solutions. They didn't understand the timeframes involved. They didn't understand the capital costs. And they really didn't understand the regulatory environment and how important that plays in these new technologies. And so kind of my office, and really an extension of that, was the what we call the California Energy Innovation Ecosystem, or entrepreneurial ecosystem, was to really try to kind of bring about kind of better solutions and strategies for how we develop and scale up new startup companies.
Excellent, excellent. And Eric, would you mind just giving us an overview of what the CEC does, how they work with entrepreneurs, and we'll dive a little bit deeper, but just for someone that may not be familiar with what the CEC's mission is.
Yeah, so the CEC, it is the state's primary energy policy and planning agency. We collaborate quite extensively with our sister agencies that also have kind of oversight in the energy sector, most notably the California Public Utilities Commission and the California Air Resources Board. The Energy Commission has authority oversighting thermal power plants. We also set building and appliance standards for the state of California. Some of our other responsibilities include really forecasting energy supply and demand across the state. And then one of the critical functions is within the Energy Commission, really trying to bring new energy science and technologies into the fold and into the market. So as I mentioned, I'm part of the Energy Research and Development Division. We have a broad scope. We develop, kind of new science and tools around how do we better prepare the state for climate change impacts on the energy infrastructure. We have a big focus on investing in new technologies that cut across renewable energy, energy efficiency, energy storage, looking at ways to transition the grid into kind of this more decentralized grid based on on-site renewable energy and storage. And I'll just kind of add, Ben, so within the Research and Development Division, we administer a number of programs to really support new technologies. On average, it's between $150 to $200 million each year. And the funding is kind of cobbled together from various sources. Kind of our flagship programs, what we call the Electric Program Investment Charge, which is about $125 million to really develop new technologies in the electricity sector. We have a complementary program, which is called the Natural Gas R&D Program, which provides about $20 to $25 million. In addition, we have a program, it's called the Food Processors Investment Program. And this provides kind of incentives for food processors to install emerging technology solutions in their operations to help them reduce their greenhouse gas emissions.
Excellent. Now, Eric, do we have it's okay if we don't, but do we have a PowerPoint or any of the presentation material we could share on screen here?
I don't have a PowerPoint with me.
Okay, yeah, no worries. Okay, so just going from there. So we have the different programs supporting kind of the clean tech technologies coming forward. How have you guys helped entrepreneurs? Like, what are the ways that entrepreneurs get involved and tap into the CEC's resources here? And then are there any success stories you could also share with us as well?
Yeah, sure. So a couple of ways we support clean energy entrepreneurship. One is through direct grant funding. The other way is making sure startup companies have access to the right information, the right resources, more the form of indirect services. So a couple of ways is through direct grant funding, and we typically do this through a competitive solicitation process where we'll scope around kind of certain technology topics, and we'll issue a competitive funding opportunity around that. Then startup companies can apply for that, and they'll submit a proposal. Those proposals will go through kind of an evaluation and scoring process, and then the proposals that score the highest are then approved for funding. And typically our funding levels range from about $1 million to $5 million, depending on the specific topic and the stage of the technology. Kind of talking a little bit about the ecosystem. We have a program called Calseed, which is our small grant program. And in most cases, kind of our first touch point with a lot of startup companies is through Calseed. And kind of complementing Calseed is we have 4 innovation clusters, of which the Wet Center leads the one for the Central Valley. But these innovation clusters basically oversee incubator services throughout each region. And so a lot of startup companies kind of come to us through the various services that the innovation clusters provide. And so between Calseed and innovation clusters, that's really kind of the first touch point for the Energy Commission with a lot of these startup companies. And through that, we kind of bring them into kind of the larger, we call it statewide ecosystem, where there's a lot more funding opportunities, not just through the Energy Commission, but other programs through kind of the climate change investments, as well as some programs that are run through CPUC as well as other state agencies. One of the things we've really tried to do is, especially for startup companies, there's a lot of information out there for startup companies. There's a lot of different programs. There's a lot of different funding opportunities. It's not very well centralized. So one of the things we launched last October is a new website platform called Empower Innovation. And one of the things this does is it really curates a lot of these funding opportunities, not just funding opportunities, other like prize-based competitions, news articles, information, events, and kind of puts that in kind of a centralized resource. So it's one of the ways we encourage startup companies to they're trying to kind of stay up to speed with everything going on, is to kind of register on that platform. The other thing the platform does is allows for startup companies to find partners, especially when they're applying for grant funding opportunities. One of the things most grant funding opportunities always ask for is kind of the partnerships. Are they partnering with a laboratory? Do they have a pilot demonstration site? There's a big policy emphasis right now in the state of California on equity and making sure low income parts of the state are benefiting from kind of this transition to a low carbon economy. And so especially in California, most of these funding opportunities really require that you have kind of a project partner where you're planning to demonstrate your technology with. And so the Empower Innovation platform helps startup companies start to make those connections.
Excellent. And speaking on that, we have a variety of different entrepreneurs here in the audience today. So some are in ag, some are in energy, some are in water. How would you recommend a startup kind of assess what programs they would be viable for? Where can they go, or who can they speak with to kind of help them find what programs they may or may not be applicable for them?
Yeah, and this gets a little bit challenging. As I mentioned earlier, the state tends to cobble its funding for clean tech through various sources, and each kind of funding source has its own somewhat unique requirements. Just to give an example, so as I mentioned, one of our programs is called the Electric Program Investment Charge. So the funding source for that program comes from electric ratepayers from Pacific Gas and Electric, Southern California Edison, and San Diego Gas and Electric. So one of the requirements of that program is that we only fund technologies that are going to benefit the ratepayers of those companies. And so part of those requirements mean if you're doing a demonstration project, it has to be in one of those service territories. Kind of on the flip side, when we're talking about our food processor investment program, the source of funding for that program is the climate investments. So it doesn't have those types of limitations, but one of the things it does require is that you're able to do some sort of accounting on what your greenhouse gas reductions is going to be. So there's a lot of nuance between the various programs. One of the things we always encourage entrepreneurs to do is to, whenever we issue a funding opportunity, we have what's called a pre-application workshop. And what will happen is the staff will give kind of a presentation on that specific funding opportunity, the scope, the requirements, but more importantly, it gives an opportunity for startup companies to ask questions of the staff, to ask if they might qualify. And they can ask the questions at the actual workshop itself. They can also submit written questions. And we actually respond to every question we get, and we post those responses. So it gives a little bit of clarity if they think they might qualify for a specific funding opportunity or not. The other thing we encourage is to really work with the innovation clusters. We meet with each innovation cluster collectively once a month, and it helps us really communicate some of these nuances to them so they can help explain that to startup companies, because it can get a little bit confusing. And so I think the innovation clusters have a good feel for the various programs and some of the requirements and which startup companies might be eligible for which programs and funding opportunities.
Excellent. So considering there's different, if we could dive a little bit further into the funding opportunities, could you just elaborate? I know we hit it at the high level, what they are, what they cover. We don't have to hit all of them, but just some highlights that you see as some great opportunities for companies that they should be aware of.
And then Ben, we are starting to get some questions in the chat relating to that as well. So we do have some questions from the audience coming in.
Yeah.
Perfect. And keep putting in your questions. We'll keep asking them. Q&A is open through the chat.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, Ben, on average, we probably issue about $200 million within the R&D division in new grant funding. We issue about, I'd say, 1 to 2 new funding opportunities each month. The scope of these is somewhat specific. So 1 month or 1 year, we might issue a solicitation around PV. Another month, it might be a solicitation targeted towards energy storage or bioenergy. So they're very technology specific a lot of times, the topics. One of the things we've done, and one of the things I would encourage startup companies to be on the lookout for, is sometimes the timing of those funding opportunities doesn't always work for startup companies. And so we're issuing a program we call Bridge. Essentially, it's for startup companies. Maybe they've gotten their first bit of funding through the Energy Commission or through the National Science Foundation or the Department of Energy, and they're ready for that next bit of funding to really kind of take their technology to the next level. And so the scope of our Bridge funding opportunity is pretty broad. It encompasses a lot of different technologies. The other thing we do is we have, it's not kind of a one-time shot where you only have one opportunity to submit an application. We allow people to submit proposals on a more quarterly basis. So we're getting ready to release that in June, later this month. The other new opportunity we're going to be having coming out is what we call our ramp solicitation. So this is for companies where they've done some pilot demonstrations and they're ready to take that next step and start to develop kind of their first manufacturing line around their products. And so this funding opportunity helps provide that financial as well as some of the technical assistance for these startup companies to begin to move more towards a kind of a manufactured product.
Excellent. So I know we've got some questions in the past on Calseed and what that process looks like. Would you mind just doing an overview of that program, and also, you know, what companies make sense for it as well?
Yeah, so with Calseed, is our small grant program. We kind of structured into 2 phases, what we call the concept award and then what we call the prototype award. And so every year we accept applications for the concept award, and companies can, it's typically around the February timeframe, and companies can submit, you know, a pretty streamlined application to be selected for up to $150,000 in funding. They also get some other services along with that $150,000, as well as connections to the various incubator programs throughout the state. And if they're selected for the $150,000, they're also eligible in the October timeframe through kind of a business plan competition we run through CleanTech Open to get selected for an additional $450,000 in additional funding. So it's really kind of that first bit of funding to help startup companies with their proof of concept. We typically look for companies that, you know, they haven't gotten a lot of private sector investment yet, typically under $1 million in private sector investment. We're looking, you know, kind of a stage where they're, you know, really starting to think about developing an early stage prototype. Companies that are already at the demonstration stage are probably too far along for Calseed, and we'd recommend that they look at other CEC funding opportunities.
Excellent. So another program, and Helly's, thank you for providing those links. Everyone, there's more information to be found in the chat section, so feel free to click those links. And if you have any questions while you're looking it over, please feel free to chat them in. Another program we get asked about frequently is CalTest bid. Seems like there's a lot of companies here that could really utilize that program to develop to the next level. Would you mind kind of give us an overview and maybe any insight to the entrepreneurs that are applying for that or have applied for that, that could be valuable through that process?
Yeah, CalTest bid's a new program for us. We're really excited about it. We had our first round of applications that were due back in April. So just to explain a little bit about what CalTest bid is we've established kind of this network of testing facilities and laboratory facilities across the state that's comprised currently of Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, as well as the UC campuses. Over time, we're hoping to kind of expand that network even further. But what CalTest bid does is it gives startup companies access to those facilities and the expertise at those various campuses. So applicants that apply, and if they're selected, they can get a voucher. And through that voucher, they're able to take it to one of these facilities and be able to access their testing laboratory services, as well as the expertise at these facilities. And what this is really intended to do is, especially when these companies are at the prototype stage and they're wanting to start field trials with customers, it really helps kind of provide the data and to a certain extent, the certifications they can then take with them to various customers and say, listen, we're ready to, we think our technology is safe. We think it performs at superior to maybe some of the best in class solutions they might be using, and helps them really kind of get some inroads with customers that are looking to be kind of the early adopter from some of these new technology solutions.
Now, Eric, just from your perspective here, what technologies, what trends in the clean tech sector are you excited about or really paying close attention to?
Yeah, so a couple really come to mind is really around energy storage. Storage is going to be, it's probably going to be the most critical technology for decarbonizing our energy sector. There's been a lot of advancements around lithium-ion technology over the past 5 or 6 years. We're starting to get to a point with lithium-ion technology where, we're not going to be able to make these batteries much denser. And so we're really looking for innovations that can kind of take lithium-ion technology to that next step, which a lot of times what we call is lithium metal batteries. The other kind of area in energy storage we're really excited about is long duration storage. Most storage is about 4 to 8 hours, but what we really need is storage that's 100 hours. And so we're really excited about some of the technologies we're seeing in thermal batteries and some other kind of different battery chemistries alternative to lithium that can really provide 100+ hours of storage at a cost of less than $10 per watt. I forget the definition. So we have a few projects in that category. The other area we're really excited about is really kind of this move towards electrification. We're seeing a lot of interest and excitement and advancements around electric heat pumps, both for space and hot water heating on the building side, but we're also seeing heat pump technology start to move into industrial applications. And so that's pretty exciting.
Excellent. Excellent. Now, with being here in the Central Valley, obviously we have quite a bit to do with ag and energy savings there in the field. And then of course on the water side as well. Are there any trends that you've seen on the clean tech going in there that you'd like to discuss, or on the energy savings that comes to mind?
Yeah. So now I'll just talk about maybe a couple companies I think are doing some pretty cool stuff. One is Peripheral. They essentially make a product. It's based on their fluid osmosis membrane. That's a significant improvement over previous fluid osmosis membranes, and so they're able to take industrial wastewater and be able to treat it for on-site reuse in a much smaller footprint in a much less energy-intensive process. We're also seeing a lot of kind of really interesting innovations around kind of that big data IoT space. Powwow, which I believe is a Blue Tech Valley company, they're doing some really cool things on the data analytics side around irrigation pumping and really helping to optimize irrigation pumping to meet so that the users can know when there's issues with the pumps, but also how to optimize their energy use.
Correct. Great. I'm going to turn to a few of the questions here. Again, keep chatting them in. From Matthew Gillian. Matthew asks Eric, or actually, you know what, Matthew, if you've got your microphone, feel free to just turn it off and ask directly if you can.
Yes, thank you. Hi, Eric. So the Cal EVIP program, do you have any, well, when I applied, I have 2 applications in, and the day the website went live, there was some hiccups in that website. And so they kind of, well, what I've been told via emails that they sort of put everything on hold and they're still going through and reviewing application. Do you have any update on that process or any insight to that at all?
Yeah, and I'll say, so the Cal EVIP program is actually administered by our Fuels and Transportation Division. So I'm not quite up to speed with what's been going on with that program.
Okay.
The only updates or kind of guidance I can give is in each solicitation manual, there's usually a point of contact that we list. It's the contract or CGL officer. So I would just follow up with them to find out what the status of that is.
Then we have Derek Roberts. Derek, do you want to ask your question? If not, I can just read it. Okay, I'll just read it. How much total megawatt hours battery storage is needed in California for reliable 100% carbon-free power in the state? I know that's quite a figure. Any response to that, Eric?
Yeah, so I don't know if there's a number we've been able to put out there. I can speak to the Energy Commission's been leading a study. It's called the SB 100 study, and it's essentially looking at how do we get towards this carbon neutral electricity grid by 2045. And I think as part of that, we'll include some studies of how much storage we'll need. It's like anything, it's going to be a complete guess right now because storage technology is improving so much. One of the things we don't know is how much load flexibility we're going to be able to unlock out of our buildings, what that does towards kind of some of the storage capacity we'll need. We also don't know if, I think there's still questions about whether California and kind of the regional transmission, the RTO, which is the California Independent System Operator, is going to expand beyond the state of California. And so that would allow even more flexibility into the system, which might have some impacts on the storage market. I think kind of that's flexibility has been kind of the buzzword for a long time as we think about kind of these 2045 goals. And especially most of the generation we expect to come online is going to continue to be PV and wind. And we're going to just need a lot more flexibility in the system, either through storage, either through demand response, or either through being able to import and export through a much larger transmission system.
Perfect. And Peter Hewitt also had a few questions he wanted to add in.
Sure.
Hi, Eric. So I'm really focused on water management technologies and looking at integrating a variety of pillars that make up that integrated solution set for commercial buildings. Not so much on the ag side, but more on the commercial building side. What are you seeing trend-wise for water conservation incentives for building owners and facilities managers in many of the major urban markets in California?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know how intelligently I can speak to that. For a while, especially when we were going back to kind of 2016, when the drought was obviously a critical issue, we were seeing a lot more incentives, mostly through kind of the municipal water providers to really try to focus on water conservation. Since then, there hasn't been as much, to the best of my knowledge, there hasn't been as much incentives for that, but it looks like we might be heading into another drought period. So that's something we could see again. But yeah, I'd have to do some follow-up on if anybody has any better idea on that.
Is there someone within the CEC that is focused on water management and that area besides your team? I mean, I'm just trying to open up dialogues with the right people who are focused on this across the state.
Yeah, so the closest thing within the CEC would be our efficiency division. So one of the things they're responsible for is setting appliance standards. And this includes water appliances, such as toilets and in the building.
Okay. Is that something that I could just through email and or phone open up a dialogue with the person that heads that up?
Yes, it is.
Who is that person?
I'll have to follow up to find out who is the manager that oversees the.
Peter, if you look in the chat, Helen
Yeah.
just shared a link that should bring you to a little more information as well.
Okay, great. I see that now. Thank you.
So Eric, I know one of the other benefits of working with the CEC, whether it's through a program or through funding, there's a lot of credibility that comes with that for a startup, especially if it's an unproven technology or an unproven team. Objectively as well, the more that these companies continue to sell and get their products to market with their customers, the stronger the impact they have from an environmental standpoint. What is there anything that the CEC does to help bridge that gap between, okay, we've done the piloting, here's how you could leverage us, here's how we can help set up some contacts, whether it be with utilities or other private companies or other public opportunities? Is there anything the CEC does to help with that commercialization process?
Yeah, that's a good question, and there is. And so I think you touched upon something. One of the things we've seen, companies just by nature of getting a CEC award become a much bigger magnet for private sector investment. My team did some analysis this last year for our EVIP program and looked at how much follow-on investment companies have gotten after just getting a CEC award, and it's over $1.8 billion. And we're still trying to do some further digging because we think the number is actually much higher. So just by nature of getting a CEC award, companies are better positioned to get private sector investment. The other way we're kind of supporting a lot of these startup companies is just by creating exposure and visibility for them. We do a lot of blog write-ups about the startup companies. One of the things our vice chair and our chair like to do is go out and visit the startup companies, and through their channels really try to kind of promote the companies we fund. A couple other things we do is every year we have an annual symposium, and it typically attracts over 800 people. This year it'll be a virtual symposium, but we have a lot of space where we let companies really kind of pitch their ideas to the audience beyond the various panels that we set up. And so just trying to create that exposure for them.
Excellent. Now, I want to get to events in a bit here, but let's do the flip side. So you said investors, they're pile driving into companies that are winning CEC awards. What do you attribute that to? Why are they looking at companies that are getting the CEC award and letting that kind of be an indicator that they should be writing a check? What's the reasoning for that on their end?
Yeah, and it has to do with the CEC being, getting a CEC award essentially being kind of a validator for private sector investors. Especially you talk to a lot of venture capital companies, they don't have the resources or the expertise to really dig into the technical merits around the technologies being developed. And so anytime they can see that, a government agency that's independent has basically kind of put their somewhat of a stamp of approval and said, this is a technology that, has some potential, has some merits behind it. It just kind of raises the profile of the company with private sector investors.
And I know you spoke about the various events. Just could we do a quick overview? I know with COVID-19, some things may be changing, but historically speaking, could you run us through some of the events you offer?
Yeah, so every year we do, as I mentioned, we do a big annual symposium for our EVIP program. It had been scheduled for April this last year. And so the symposium really brings together kind of everyone, a lot of different stakeholder groups kind of working in the electricity sector. This includes utilities, local governments, kind of various customers that are looking to be or have been kind of the pilot sites for a lot of these emerging technologies. Includes representatives from the military, from universities, as well as kind of the innovators. And so it's typically in the past, it's been a one-day event where we have various panel sessions, plenary speakers, typically from the legislature, as well as kind of thought leaders in the energy sector and kind of innovation space. With the COVID, we're having to rethink at least our annual symposium. Right now, we're looking at kind of the fall timeframe to hold a virtual symposium. I think kind of part of what we're seeing is it's hard when you're doing something online to keep people there for 7-8 hours. And so we're looking at kind of doing maybe something more around 3 or 4 days and giving a couple hours of content each day to kind of keep people engaged. On top of that, we do kind of these topical forums around key topics. So in February, we did one on resiliency, especially in light of the wildfires and the power shutoffs, or the planned power shutoffs that were happening from utilities, and really try to focus on how do we better scale up some of the, what are some of the new technology solutions that can really help address this issue, and how do we start to scale those up, and really trying to have that conversation with regulators, startup companies in the utilities, as well as other stakeholders in this space. We are planning another forum for kind of the late summer in the September timeframe, looking at building decarbonization and what are some of the emerging technologies that can really support building decarbonization. What types of challenges are we going to face? Thinking about some of the local regulatory ordinances and trying to do that. There's a lot of questions on how do you finance kind of these energy efficiency upgrades. And so, like I said, really kind of the key point of these forums is, one, visibility for some of the organizations developing some of these new solutions, but really to try to kind of facilitate that discussion among all the various stakeholders that can really kind of help make this transformation happen.
Excellent. Helle, I know I've been asking away here, but is there any questions or thoughts you'd like to ask?
Actually, the question I had written down, I think you and Eric already covered, but I would just, first of all, thank you, Eric, for everything you shared, and then really encourage our entrepreneurs to be involved with the CEC activities, especially as Eric already mentioned, the Empower Innovation Network platform is a great way to get access to both information about events and funding and potential partnerships as well. I think that's as always kind of difficult to find those industry partners or other partners that you might want to collaborate with on a project, but this is really meant to be that platform where you can do that. And even more, I think now than ever, where we don't have the opportunity to go to some of these events that Eric mentioned, where we could form those partnerships. We just need some other tools to do that. And I think then One Network platform could be that. I will also recommend getting on the email list for the California Energy Commission. They send out a lot of information, and you can kind of self-select what areas of interest you have. And then you'll get notification every time there's a new solicitation or a meeting or questions or answers to questions. It's a lot of information you can get on there as well. And then also connecting with us, the Blue Tech Valley Energy Cluster. As Eric mentioned, we are one of 4 innovation clusters in California funded under the EVIP program and part of this larger ecosystem for California. And we're always here to help entrepreneurs. Either we can help them ourselves with our program, or we can provide referrals, introductions, or access to other resources as well. So I just want to throw that out there that we can help as well, because our goal is to move entrepreneurs forward and see some of these great technologies get into the hands of the California ratepayers.
Excellent. Thank you, Helle. Joseph, I know you have a question. Are you able to turn off your mic, or turn on your mic, actually?
There we go. Yes. Hey, Eric, what are the challenges that California is having with curtailment, and how does the CEC envision the curtailment with solar? Because a lot of things I read is that we're going to have capacity about 3 times our solar capacity to compensate for cloudy days and bad weather days. So just like to get your views on that.
Yeah, and it's so there's been a few strategies to kind of deal with the curtailment issue. One thing that's kind of come up is there was a study, I think it was about a year ago, that said it wasn't one we developed in California, but said curtailment, it might be the most cost-effective approach is just to overbuild PV and just deal with the curtailment issue. given how cheap PV is coming and how cheap it's going to continue to grow. It's definitely a different thought process than how we've currently treated electricity system planning in California. But really, as far as the curtailment goes, storage is going to be critical to that, as well as kind of the load flexibility piece. We used to call it demand response. We've now kind of called load flexibility, and this is the ability to be able to turn on appliances, and kind of an extension of that is with electric vehicles, to be able to charge vehicles during these periods of overgen. Especially, so a couple of end uses we're really looking at hard is one is around electric water heaters, and being able to kind of heat water when we have periods of overgeneration on the system, as well as electric vehicles. A couple of the tech, partly a technology issue. It's partly how do we get the regulatory structures right at the Cal ISO level, as well as the CPUC issue. And then there's kind of the technology component to that, and it's essentially how do you kind of better standardize some of the communication standards so that all these various devices can work better with one another.
Great. Hey, I have a follow-up question on the load flexibility research you're doing internally. What department would I talk to and communicate about that?
That'd actually be the research and development division. One thing is we are planning a big kind of what we're calling a load flexibility research center, a new funding opportunity to essentially establish that for later this summer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. Again, just keep chatting in any questions and we'll get to you. So Eric, one thing that's coming to mind here, a lot of different resources. Are there any resources that you offer that you often see entrepreneurs kind of overlook, or they're just not being utilized to their fullest extent? Like what are some of the areas of the CEC that just aren't getting the attention they should?
Good question. So typically when we give an award to a company, there's a whole statement of work that comes with that funding agreement, and it looks more like a contract, but has various objectives and tasks that the startup companies need to perform as part of that grant agreement. For the most part, we leave that to the startup companies to propose what they're going to do in that statement of work, but we do have a couple of tasks, boilerplate tasks in there that I don't think are always quite utilized. One of those is we include a set aside for the for recipients to do tech transfer activities, and it can be a good source of funding to really try to bring in experts to help them with their go-to-market strategy, to really help them think through what their target markets are, to do kind of that customer discovery and to try to interface with various customers that they're trying to reach out to. We don't see them always utilize that piece of funding and that task as well as I think they probably could.
Okay, makes sense. So I kind of like seeing the flip side of, I know we have primarily entrepreneurs on the call, but I think it's important to see, CEC has a lot of stakeholders in it, not just entrepreneurs, of course, investors. The other side is private companies or public corporations on the larger side, utilities, for example. How do they engage with you? So if we've got a larger private company or utility or anything along those lines, how are they engaging with the CEC? And then on the technology side, how do they utilize you guys to find the new technologies and who they should go with?
Yeah, and so I'll speak to the kind of the R&D side of that. So a lot of times they're either a partner on a agreement we fund, or they're actually the prime recipient. So sometimes they're the ones applying for the grant, and then they find the technology partner or partners they want to demonstrate that technology. What they get out of it is, a lot of times these technologies are, they're still risky, they're unproven. And what we can offer is to kind of help bear that financial risk for them so that they can try something maybe they wouldn't be able to normally try through their own funding mechanisms. Really kind of the big success story in this front's been microgrids. um, the CEC through the R&D division, we've been developing microgrid technology for at least 10 years. About 4 or 5 years ago, it was really kind of time to take microgrid technology to that next stage and really get the technology out there into these facilities and into these communities. And it's shown just huge benefits for facilities and customers that installed microgrid technology. One example is Blue Lake Rancheria. It's a tribal community casino up in Humboldt County. And so they applied and received a $5 million grant from us about 4 years ago to basically build a microgrid at their facility. Less than probably, I'd say, 6 months after the microgrid got commissioned, there was a big wildfire that broke out there. They actually used the microgrid as kind of the staging center for fire crews. And when the outage happened to the larger community, the fire crews were able, kind of the command center for where the fire crews were kind of communicating their operations out of, actually was able to stay online. And then this most recent fall timeframe, when there was the public shutoffs, they actually kind of converted the casino and the hotels to keep power on, and especially people that had some life-threatening illnesses that needed power to their life-saving devices. They were able to kind of keep power on and really try to keep those people alive.
Wow, that's interesting. So I know with COVID-19, this changes the subject a little bit on events, but one area that I've always found the CECs offering to be incredibly powerful is the networking opportunities to the events you offer. Would you mind, just ignoring moving forward, but historically speaking, would you mind elaborating a little bit further on, what connections are people making at your events? Because we know there's people from all walks and backgrounds showing up. What have you seen from your perspective from a networking side of things?
Yeah, I think one of the really powerful networking opportunities we've always seen is for the startup companies to connect with customers, to connect with kind of policymakers and regulators who, some of their decisions can help really create some of the market opportunities for these new technologies. I remember an example last year, we had one of our panels was focused on startup companies, and we had about 4 or 5 panelists, and right after their panel session was over, they got flooded with people that were looking to try to buy or have their technology installed in their buildings or facilities or in their operations. The other is you'll have legislatures, regulators, and other types of policymakers, and they'll hear about technology, and they'll kind of bring that back with them. And when they're thinking about some of these policy decisions, they're doing so with some of these more advanced technologies in mind. So they're not so limited to kind of what's in front of them, what's already commercially available, but what are the opportunities that some of these emerging technologies can offer.
Excellent. And from the obviously from the corporate side, just not only the efficiencies from a business perspective, but the environmental impact. Are you seeing that as a top priority for companies? Is utilizing these technologies to reach their carbon goals or whatever environmental impact they're looking for? And obviously they're coming here for that. And I guess do you see that as an increasing trend, that companies are becoming more and more conscious of that?
Yeah, it is. I think obviously the environmental is definitely influencing a lot of their decisions. I think what's also influencing a lot of their decisions is some of these technologies are just better technologies, even taking out the environmental component. One of the benefits, if you're using a gas end use and you switch to electricity, you don't get the wide range of fluctuations you do with electricity prices that you might do on the gas side, which can still be subject to supply constraints. And so there are some other kind of benefits to some of these new technologies. On the building side, a lot of these they're more efficient technologies, but they also open up a lot of more design opportunities for building designers. A company we're kind of excited about, Lucent Optics, they have this kind of bendable LED panel. It's not shaped like your it's an LED technology that's not shaped like a traditional incandescent bulb. It can be, shaped to all different kind of forms and fixtures, and it really opens up some pretty cool opportunities in the building design space.
Excellent. Well, one area that you spoke on, and of course, I think most of us are familiar with, is the clean tech investment seemed to just drop off at some point. Investors weren't aware of some of the challenges they faced, the time frames, whatever it may be, just the technology itself. There's a multitude of reasons. How have you seen that change? Are you seeing investors come back? Are you seeing them change their perspective? What's the positive news, or just the overall state of the investment side of things into clean tech now currently?
Yeah, I think pre-COVID-19, I think we were starting to see the VC sector come back a little bit into clean tech. It was still pretty narrowly focused on your more data analytics software platforms. I think what we've seen with startup companies, or at least in just the strategy in general, has changed. I think corporate strategics are probably a much better investment partner than venture capital for most clean tech startup companies. And I think with the corporate strategics, these are the large corporations that have kind of a strategic investment arm. Their models changed too. I think the days kind of like Bell Lab, where big corporations kind of had these, in-house R&D capabilities and activities. They found it much more a better strategy to basically be on the lookout for startup companies and new technologies that they can bring into their organization, either through strategic acquisitions or even in investments. And so they have longer time frames. They're more patient than VCs, which essentially want to get out in 2 to 3 years, and especially if you're developing kind of more of a hard tech solution. Most hard tech solutions, you're looking more at 5 to 7 years to reach commercialization.
And who would these, let's say if I was an entrepreneur and I was considering fundraising, and who would these corporations be? Like, what do they typically look like? Is there any characteristics as far as, hey, this would be a great fit for my company because they're showing X, Y, and Z to be a potential strategic partner?
Yeah, I think it's going to be very technology dependent, but it's names I think most entrepreneurs would recognize. It's your Siemens, it's your GE Ventures, Boeing X, even Google. They have kind of their skunk work labs, but a lot of times they're still looking at startup companies that they can kind of bring into their portfolio. We've seen Enel, which they're an Italian utility company. They've really started to establish a presence in California and have made a number of strategic acquisitions with California startup companies.
And if anyone has any questions, feel free to chat them in. Last minute questions here. Eric, I want to turn it over to you real quick and just ask, is there any general, we've got about 20 or so, 15 or so entrepreneurs on the call that are obviously here looking to connect with the CEC. Do you have any call to action or any general comments or advice that just general commentary that you'd like to just speak directly to them on?
Yeah, I think one, kind of following Hele's advice and, sign up on the listserv. There's a lot of information that comes out of the CEC when you start signing up for the listservs, but it can be worth it to invest the time to try to sift through all that information and try to find the right opportunities. One thing I always recommend for if you're thinking about applying for a CEC funding opportunity, when we do a pre-application workshop, even if it's not the right funding opportunity, but to listen in, just so you get a feel for the types of questions being asked by different potential applicants and the type of responses. I think the other thing is, it's a competitive process to get a CEC grant. Just because you don't get one the first time, I wouldn't get discouraged. One thing we do is applicants that apply that aren't selected for funding, we offer debriefs with them, and it can just, and where they can meet with the scoring team and they can get suggestions, or where the scoring team felt their proposal was strong, where they felt it could have been improved. And it's great feedback for applicants to get when they think about applying for that X. So like I said, just because you don't get it the first time, don't be discouraged. I'd continue to keep applying.
Excellent. Well, I don't see any new questions coming in. So Eric, I just wanted to thank you for taking the time to be with us today. I mean, it was great learning more about everything going on. And Helly, I know you've put some great links in the chat box for people to follow up and get more information. Helly, is there any closing comments or questions you'd like to end today on?
Well, I just want to thank Eric one more time for his insight and just making it easier for the entrepreneurs to connect with the CEC. And I do agree, we have done the debrief as well, not necessarily with the CEC, but other funding agencies that have given us feedback, and I can highly recommend that. So apply and take advantage of those post-application services as well that the CEC is offering. But yeah, thank you, Eric, and we look forward to continue working with you and hopefully connecting some of our entrepreneurs to you as well.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Helly, and thanks for all your great work at Blue Tech Valley.
Thank you again, Eric. For everyone here today, thank you for tuning in and watching. Next week, we have Jeff Dillon, experienced entrepreneur with 10 plus acquisitions under his belt. He's going to be talking about strategic partnerships. So just like today, we've kind of been hinting at that. Next week, we will be diving a little bit more in depth on that subject. So feel free to join then as well. So until then, take care, everyone. Thank you.